1 year later, and ironically, just 1 year after Eisenhower gave his farewell address, the Joint Chiefs of Staff at the Pentagon, which is the nation's highest military officers, they had crafted a plan which has become known as the Northwoods Plan, or Operation Northwoods. And in this plan, which was signed and approved all the way up through the Joint Chiefs of Staff and signed by L.L. Lemnitzer, they called for committing false flag terrorist attacks in order to blame on Cuba, and then use that as justification for a war against them. And in fact, the title, the subject heading of the document reads, "Justification for Military Intervention in Cuba." And they go through and they list elaborate plans. One of them involves chartering an aircraft with people boarded under carefully prepared aliases, like a sports team of young adults going to some event. They charted their plan to go over Cuba, and then at some point a drone was substituted, and then the drone would be flown over Cuban airspace. A Mayday signal would be transmitted, and then the aircraft was to be detonated by remote control and then blamed on Cuba. They had other plans of attacking people in Miami and Washington, D.C. They had Remember the Maine incident, that was their words, not mine, where they would actually blow up a ship in Havana Harbor or somewhere there in Cuba, blame it on Cuba, and then use that as the justification for war. And they even admitted in the document that they were trying to manipulate the public. I mean, they made the statement, casualty lists in U.S. newspapers would cause a helpful wave of national indignation. This plan was given to the President Kennedy at the time. It was declined by the President. However, President Kennedy was killed shortly after that.
There is compelling evidence and even prima facie evidence in the 911 gathering evidence about that day, September 11th, that this was a setup. This was an inside job.
Well, I think the evidence is overwhelming that it was an inside job on several counts. I could cite evidence about the behavior of the President and the Secret Service at the school in Florida, indicating that they had to have had foreknowledge that the President wasn't a target. Likewise, for some reason, the President didn't assume his constitutional role as Commander-in-Chief.
So no, we do experiments in science. And that's what I've done with respect to 9/11 as much as I can. We have quite a bit of data. We have actually some of this dust, and we have analyzed the dust. There's a lot in there we could talk about as we go along that points to an inside job.
Whether or not the Pentagon was hit by Flight 77, the evidence suggests it must have been an inside job.
The official story itself is actually a greater crime than the crimes of 9/11. Many more people have been killed, more Americans have been killed. Our freedoms have been compromised, our Constitution has been compromised, our economy has been compromised. We're endorsing torture, our values are lost.
I believe 9/11 was an inside job for many reasons. I start to look at the Patriot Act. I realized that the Patriot Act was ready to go on 9/11, a massive document that could not have been produced within a couple of days, which is what happened when 9/11 happened. Almost immediately we got the Patriot Act, and by October 16th it was signed into law.
Well, I've been involved with 9/11 actually since 1993. That's when the first World Trade Center bombing happened on February 26, 1993. Primarily because when I did research of it and I followed the story on that, you come to find out that all the World Trade Center bombings in 1993 had been on the CIA payroll in Afghanistan. And so I was very suspicious of that bombing and the fact that it was more or less probably staged by government agencies in our own government, namely the most prominent on there would be the FBI.
On February 23, 1993, a bomb went off beneath the two towers of the World Trade Center. The bomb was in a truck on a timed device in level B2 of the garage. The explosion went 7 stories up, killing 6 people and injuring more than 1,000. According to the 9/11 Commission report, Yamzi Youssef, a Sunni extremist, planted the bomb. Youssef fled to Pakistan immediately after the bombing. Ralph Blumenthal of the New York Times reported another story on October 28, 1993.
It was supposedly supposed to be a sting operation where they had an FBI informant find a group of people that were allegedly going to do something harmful in the to the United States, organize them, and do a sting operation on them to arrest them. However, that didn't happen. The bomb did go off in the basement of the World Trade Center, and they did arrest these individuals by FBI agents that actually did their job, the field agents, and come to find out that all of them had been on the CIA payroll in Afghanistan.
Contrary to the 9/11 Commission report, apparently Imad Salem, a 43-year-old former Egyptian army officer, was used by the United States government to penetrate a circle of Muslim extremists. Mr. Salem secretly recorded hours of his conversations with the law enforcement officers that told him to build the bomb. Salem wanted to complain to FBI headquarters about the Bureau's failure to stop the bombing. But Agent John Aktasev persuaded him otherwise, saying, quote, "I don't think the New York people would like the things out of the New York offices to go to Washington, D.C." Agent Nancy Floyd verified Imad Salem's account. The Independent reported that several of the bombers were trained by the CIA to fight in the Afghan war, and that the CIA admitted partial responsibility for the bombings. Ron Kuby, defense attorney, said concerning the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, quote, "The mastermind of the 1993 WTC bombing is the government of the United States. It was a phony government-engineered conspiracy to begin with, and it would never have amounted to anything had the government not planned it."
I just could not fathom the idea that here we were on the east coast of the United States, probably the most heavily populated area of our country, our nation's capital, our nation's trade center there in New York, and yet over almost 2 hours, our skies were left undefended by our military, and we have the most advanced military and radar defense system in the world. And so it seemed odd that our military wasn't able to intercept, at the very least, the plane that allegedly was flown into the Pentagon.
One can imagine incompetence, possibly leading to the towers being hit. But in the case of Flight 77, which supposedly hit the Pentagon at 9:35, the first hit was almost an hour before that on the first tower. So almost an hour after the first tower is hit, somebody who can't fly a Cessna takes over a jetliner, flies it from Ohio to D.C., does a stunt maneuver, and hits the Pentagon. This story is preposterous. D.C. has got air defenses. This plane flew over the Capitol and the White House. These are restricted zones with automatic anti-aircraft batteries. The Pentagon is probably the world's best defended building, so the notion that they could just waltz into the Pentagon like that an hour after the first tower, almost an hour after the tower was hit, it's ridiculous, completely ridiculous.
NORAD, Northern Command, and North American Aerospace Defense Command are supposed to respond immediately when an aircraft loses communications. But this was not the case on September 11, 2001. NORAD blames the FAA, and the FAA blames NORAD for the failure of communication. In an instruction to the Chairman Joint Chiefs of Staff, dated June 1, 2001, and signed by Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld, commanders in the field were stripped of all authority to act by superseding earlier Department of Defense procedures for dealing with hijacked aircraft. In 2000, fighters were launched 129 times in response to aircraft flight problems. In each occurrence,